All the moments.
John F. Kennedy died at approximately 1 o'clock.
The shared memories. All the people who've shaped our world.
The American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory.
The events we'll never forget.
As they prepared for their journey and waved goodbye and slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God.
All the times we've heard about and talked about.
I have a dream.
All the passion.
The greatest champion of all time.
The pain.
Well, I'm not a crook.
And the joy. All of history. All in one place. The History Channel. Your key to the future is a journey into the past.
The 16 million young men who register today, I say that democracy is your cause.
Boy, oh boy! We caught them with their pants down. This is an important job I'm doing.
The Second World War was probably the last of the kind of wars in which the people were unanimous in their support of it. You might say it was a gigantic drama, because in dramas, great dramas, there's always a villain. And in the recent wars, in Korea and in Vietnam, nobody knows who the villain is. It's like striking at a bowl of jello, of evil jello or something. You don't know who it is. In this case, we had Hitler, we had Mussolini, we had Hirohito, and all these people represented evil. They were living symbols of the evil. And all this justification for feeling that the entire country had in defense of evil, came to a pinpoint which was very real.
In the 30s and in the 40s in particular, cartoons were aimed at all audiences, adults and children. They absolutely weren't aimed exclusively at children, as many cartoons are today. Animation could do things that live-action films couldn't. We could see fleets of ships that would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to do in live action were simple drawings and paintings in animation. Diagrams, charts, how to explain the inner workings of guns and ships, much simpler to do with animated graphics, and much easier to explain with an animated character as the host.
I guess Honeywell came to Disney with a program to teach to how to navigate, how to do all the things that were essential to flying. One of which was what I got into, and that was to teach the GIs how to do electronic work on a C-1 autopilot, which was the forerunner of the electronic autopilot that's being used on all the airplanes today. And the simplicity of what we were doing made it easier for us to show a GI that never saw anything. He knew what animation was, and he became interested in it because it had something that would that he could sort of hold on to.
So what you were looking at is getting American soldiers, 18 to 19 years old, who were not well educated, certainly not globally educated, to understand, well, what were they fighting for? And so Disney would create, or Capra had Disney create maps which graphically depicted where these countries were and what Germany did to overrun them. The Blitzkrieg was shown in actual footage, the tanks moving through Poland, but one of the most dramatic impacts was a big stamp that would come out of the air and stamp the Nazi swastika on Poland or on France, and then black ink would move through the map. And it not only in a factual way demonstrated what had happened, but it also brought the impact home in a way that was unmistakable.
Bugs Bunny, the Super Rabbit, the Rabbit of Tomorrow.
When we were making a picture called Super Rabbit, at the end of which he joins the Marines insisted they really join. So papers were made out, and his paw prints were taken, and everything was necessary. He was given a dog tag, I guess, or a rabbit tag, if you like, and he's registered in the Marines, starting as a private and becoming a master sergeant. And he was discharged, I think, as a master sergeant in the Marines, and very proud of it too. He was.
This is the Army-Navy Screen Magazine Cutting Room, where combat film taken by Army, Navy, and Marine cameramen comes in from battlefronts all over the world. The Marine Staff Sergeant with the Expert Medal is 22-year-old Norman Hatch from Boston, Massachusetts.
Hollywood during that period of time was very gung-ho insofar as the military was concerned. Both of my major contacts with studios were at Warner Brothers. I did do some things at Fox, and I also did something at Disney.
Horses wanted for U.S. Army. Hey, I'm a horse.
But Warner's was very predominantly interested. Jack Warner had been a colonel in the Army, and so he had sort of a very strong feeling about it. Zanuck over at Fox also was a colonel in the Army, and at that time the motion picture industry under the War Activities Committee had volunteered to do all sorts of things to help the war effort.
Hollywood's most famous movie stars leave the film capital to help the government sell war bonds. Irene Dunne, Ronald Colman, Hedy Lamarr, Greer Garson, all part of a contingent of some 50 screen celebrities giving their time and talents to aid the national war effort.
The tall man with the high hat will be coming down your way. Get your savings out when you hear him shout, any bonds today? Come on and get 'em, folks. Come on, skip right up and get 'em. Any bonds today? Bonds of freedom, that's what I'm selling. Any bonds today?
I worked on a small cartoon called Any Bonds Today, and at that time, most of the things that were done in the creative end of it were by men. And as soon as they couldn't get men anymore, they did offer girls a chance to in between and do other things. And some of them became assistants, and some of them even became animators.
It's incredible to think, out of a population base of 120 million people, 90 million people went to see a film every week. That's a pretty good market share, right? And so if you want to get at the large number of people very quickly, Hollywood films was one way to do it. Radio was the other, but there was no television, there's no internet, there's no computer. So everybody wants to get their point of view put out through films.
Freedom of speech, of worship, freedom from want and fear. Taxes will keep democracy on the march.
One of the extremely difficult problems was that if you used soldiers to play the parts in live action films, they were unbelievable because they couldn't act. On the other hand, if you use actors, the soldiers who had had these terrible days and were tired and worn and mad and they wanted to be entertained, so if you used actors, they would recognize them as not being soldiers. So they were caught in a dreadful situation there. And somebody, rather brilliantly, I think Frank Capra may have been one, said, well, why not use animation?
We're working for defense. We're working for defense. We're stepping up production. My Uncle Sam's instruction. We've got a job to do, so let's all see it through. And very soon there's bound to be a V for victory.
Every man is expected to do his bit.
There's a job to be done. All production must be increased.
Get busy now.
People argued what you needed was fantasy. You needed fantasy. You didn't want to show reality. You didn't want to show the material reality of real live bodies and what happens to them during wars. You wanted fantasy. And that what Americans needed was a sense of feeling patriotism. Okay, so this is based on a lot of ideas of mobilizing people by mobilizing their feelings and mobilizing them through the visual arts.
We're harvesting the corn. We're harvesting the corn. We're stepping up production by Uncle Sam's instruction. We want to do our bit to keep our country fit. We'll keep on giving more and more until we win this war.
For the theatrical cartoons, I believe that it was not so much to teach people a lesson, but maybe to make them think a little bit and to show them that everyone else in the United States, at least, was in the same boat and that other people were in worse situations than they were. But no one was going to radically change their personal behavior based on watching a cartoon. They would have a good laugh, they would realize that they were all in the same boat, and they would go out of the theater feeling a little bit better.
Yeah, the message was sugar-coated, basically. And if it's something like rationing, makes fun of something that really annoyed most Americans. You know, if assuming they didn't have an immediate relative fighting overseas, this was probably the single greatest issue. And this is what you see repeatedly in cartoons and in feature films. And it deflates that anger, I think, in a very palatable way. So that's why shortages, for instance, are one of the things that repeatedly appear in the cartoons and are made fun of. And this was probably on day-to-day conversation between your housewife or your man working at home. This was the thing that griped them the most, was shortages. Not being able to buy a steak, not being able to get coffee. And these are the types of jokes that you see all the time.
Walt Disney is the king of fantasy, but saw himself really as a popularizer of folk tales. But you can see that the popularization of folk tales, which are to mobilize children to good ends, would be a really compelling genre for the government, who needs to mobilize Americans who are somewhat figured as children to good ends. The Disney studios did so much war work that historians like me can't even see it all.
When I first started, they called me the Duck Man because I could draw Donald Duck, and I was working with all the people who worked with Donald, and we were considered a great part of the war effort. If you desired to go to war, if you do that, you enlisted, and that was it. But Disney did a lot of war work, and you stayed there, and that's what happened to me. Well, I worked on The Duck Goes to War, and the part I did was the part that he was taking out a ersatz bean from a safe that had Hitler's face on it, and he got up in the morning and he came over there and he took out the thing, and because a coffee was at its premium in Germany, as we all knew during the war, that a bean was treasure, and he looks around and he hides this thing to make sure that no one is looking at him, and he looks this way and that way, and finally he reaches into coffee can, and he comes out with one little coffee bean.
The Führer's Face had three great things going for it. It was a Walt Disney cartoon, it starred Donald Duck, and it resulted in a hit song, a big hit that was a big morale booster during World War II.
Well, we didn't know that we won an Oscar until later on. They told us that we had won an Oscar for, and I think the Oscar came during the war, and it was very quiet.
Donald Duck in the Führer's Face is everyman, the American everyman. He's got all the human foibles. He laughs, he cries, and he has his little tantrums. And once again, though, you're poking fun at the Nazi state and Nazism, and showing, though, how every man could be affected. If we allow this to happen, you could wind up being this way. That's sort of the underlying message. And don't take for granted our liberties. And done in a brilliant way. Only Disney could do that.
In the Hollywood home of Movieland's Mickey Mouse, artist Walt Disney orders his famous cartoon characters into battle dress. They're in popular demand as emblems for the armed forces. Here's how an Air Corps insignia is created. This assignment is for the Marines Amphibious Force, a very tough commando tortoise ready for the warpath. And he comes to life before your very eyes. A Lockheed Hudson bomber, ready for delivery, is decorated with ferocious Pluto. The inscription tells the story. He's itching for a fight.
During the war, these characters were already celebrities, and people had seen them in theaters and so forth, and the fact that we were showing them playing a different part was making that much more important.
Clearly, the most poignant cartoon that may have been ever made, but certainly in the war effort, is Education for Death. The story is a story of the fact that the German people have to bring their youths and have them trained to be killed in the war, and the use of the images. The last shot, the parting shot, is a graveyard with Nazi helmets on the crosses on the graves. And to think that the intensity that this is trying to elicit in terms of our understanding of the brainwashing of the German people and have it made as a theatrical release is just incredible.
I had been directing a unit with Schlesingers for a couple of years. And when the war broke out, and it looked like, well, I would be drafted pretty quickly. So I decided rather than be drafted, I'll enlist and try and get in one of these training film units. And that is what I did. I was at Hal Roach for about 3 years. During the war years, a lot of the cartoons were slanted towards propaganda type thing and all that. And I guess my two writers came up with the idea of a barnyard setup with ducks as the characters. So we made a pretty successful picture out of it, I think.
Time passed. The bad egg grew to duckhood, and with artistic aspirations dreamed of brush and palette, but ended up with only the brush. His artistic efforts spurned, he soon turned to other endeavors.
Und vergesst nicht, du Dops, ich bin der abgeblasene Frech in Deutschland, in aller Europa, ja in der ganzen Welt.
Particularly when you're talking about characterizing the enemy as fools or insane or very humorous type of characters, that you have much less of a problem with cartoons than you would with feature films, because everyone expects cartoons to be over the top. They expect cartoons to go beyond the bounds of reality. Characters, most of them are not human beings, And if they're human beings, they're outrageous caricatures who do various things that human beings can't. People didn't watch these cartoons and take Hitler lightly. This was one way of showing our contempt for Hitler and his policies. And the same thing for the Japanese and the same thing for Mussolini. We had contempt for them. We were going to wipe them out and set things straight, but that doesn't mean that we were taking them lightly.
Yeah, it was just funny to see the takeoffs that we on those three characters, I think. But there were some gags in that thing that I'd never be caught dead on making now. But we didn't think too much of racial things and stuff like that. And I cringe now every time I see that dictator. The Japanese duck, for instance, we kind of made fun of him. But after all, there was a war going on, and you expected things like that, I think.
There was a tendency to either dismiss them or to paint them just as totally evil. The problem being is if how can this German army, if it's so powerful, how can they be such fools? Or how can Hitler have achieved what he did and be a total madman? There seems to be an inherent contradiction here. And this is where the propagandists had a problem. I don't know whether the audience had a problem. So the audience was making fun and demystifying them. And I think that's really important.
Ich bin Werksoldat. Ich lieb Musik und französische Schaubraten. Ich mache etwas als ein Nomenleder. Diese Blauer, das hat mir Hosen.
Tex Avery was the wildest animator in Hollywood, and he really pushed the envelope for what a Hollywood cartoon can be. And a lot of the things we think about in Hollywood cartoons, characters with their eyes popping out of their heads and wild exaggeration, that all came from Tex Avery. Blitz Wolf is a particularly good cartoon because it's not only Tex Avery at his best, but he's parodying Disney with the Three Little Pigs. It's a parody of Germany and Adolf Hitler, and it's, again, just Tex Avery at his height.
The devotion that everybody had to defending what we call democracy was very real, and we all cared about it. There were very few defenders of the people who wanted to stay out, and most of us would have gone if we'd been drawn in. I think, like most wars, no matter how much you care, you would prefer to take your chances and be drafted than to go vaingloriously forth. And although some people did, and I think we were all prepared to, if need be.
Let's all see it through, and very soon there's bound to be a victory.
Private Snafu was a part of the Army-Navy Screen Magazine system, and this was a cartoon done to teach lessons. Now, training films of the day were pretty dry and pretty mundane, really. They didn't do much to keep the person's interest, unfortunately. But one way to take care of that and to alleviate that monotony was to have these cartoons come along, which very graphically and very simply told a lesson. And anybody, no matter what capability of learning, could see one of these and understand what it meant. And they were very successful.
So they fooled around a lot, and they finally came up with the character Snafu, the name, which means situation, normal, all fouled up. Actually started with F, it wasn't fouled up, and those are the so that was a name the soldiers were aware of and knew well, like grunt.
I just learned a secret. It's a honey, it's a pip. But the enemy is listening, so I'll never let it slip. 'Cause when I learn a secret, boy, I zipper up my lip. Now the military secret that I carry in my brain, I keep in safe deposit with a padlock and chain. You bet I got a secret.
When Snafu first started, Frank Capra had the idea. He was the guy who put together Army Navy Screen Magazine for the armed forces. And he had an idea. He loved animation. He loved Walt Disney. Is that why not use Walt to develop a character who's the typical soldier? So we can use that character to teach these guys various things about being in the Army, various educational things. So Walt's crew tried to develop Snafu. And they even went so far as to storyboard the entire first episode called Introducing Snafu. And they had a lot of development cost in it. And I think they bid $101 a foot, somewhere in there. Well, Leon Schlesinger came along and counterbid Disney. He bid $20 a foot, including story development costs. And Walt's bid was $101 just for the animation, not including development. So when the Army saw that, you know, 3 guesses as to who got the job.
All comedy is based on human behavior, or it wouldn't be funny to you. I mean, for instance, they say the difference between a comedy and a tragedy is to who is slipping on the banana peel. If it's you, it's a tragedy. If it's somebody else, it's comedy. But Snafu wasn't a bad soldier because he was stupid. He was a bad soldier because he was lazy, because he didn't believe in the things. He thought he was wiser than they were, like Daffy Duck. And Daffy Duck, as somebody said about Daffy, is that Bugs talks, but Daffy talks too much.
Hey, give me some magazines to read for when I'm on the ship. Don't breathe a word to no one, but he's going to go by ship. It's a cinch to keep a secret if a fella just takes care. He's sailing on a troop ship. Now we got to find out where. I'm a sound and silent soldier, just as steady as a rock. Here's to my little secret with its chain and padlock. Hello, baby. Hiya. Say you're a lefty trick. I hope I'll meet some days.
A good many of the Snafu cartoons are not so much what we are fighting for, but they're more or less a primer of proper military behavior for the troops.
It's been a wonderful evening, and I'd like to stay some more. But I gotta get a move on now. I sail at 4:30. He's got to get a move on now. He sails at 4:30.
The Snafus were aimed at a military audience, and basically it was to explain to them the reason behind what may have seemed to them to be stupid little requirements or regulations, and they tried to place those in a larger context. And by doing it in cartoon fashion, for example, the Snafu cartoon Rumors, you don't think that people talking to each other on a base would have an adverse effect on the war effort. Well, in the Snafu cartoon Rumors, it is blown up so greatly that it is hugely exaggerated. I'm sure that the soldiers who were watching that said, well, that'll never really happen here, but maybe it made them think a little bit before they went out and started throwing the baloney.
What's new?
Oh, nothing much. Nice day.
Nice day for a bombing.
Yeah, nice bombing weather. Bombing weather. Bombing weather.
Sounds harmless enough. Innocent stuff. But let's take a look in and find out what's cooking.
Bombing weather. Bombing weather. Bombing weather. Bombing weather. Bombing weather. Just between you and me, pal, I hear we're in for a bombing.
Ted Geisel wrote the first 3 Snafus, Gripes and Rumors and Coming Snafu, I think, was the first ones he wrote. And it's something, he shoots off his face and baloney is flying all over the place. And that sounds like a Dr. Seuss rhyme. And after that, he said he lost interest in the character. And he was just there to supervise, and he let other people do the writing. And after that, that rhyming style kind of drops out. And that's where they get the Hope Benny kind of gags.
Balloon juice. It's phony, but it makes nice baloney. That's right. Exaggerate it. Stretch it. Multiply it. Now shoot off your face. And baloney is flying all over the place.
Yes,
E-38 in Germany. Worst air raid of the war. Yeah, they blasted hell out of Brooklyn Bridge.
The most important part of the process was probably the story meetings, because they had to be ironed out with Ted Geisel, who was the head of story on Snafu, and the people from the Army had to be involved because they had to look at all the storyboards to see if all their points were being made. And then the story men had to contribute gags. They even hired some of Bob Hope's gag writers. And after the story was done, then the director, Chuck or Bob or Frank Tashlin or whoever did it, would sit down and make layout sketches.
This may surprise you, but they're attacking this very camp.
We probably did 2 of them a month. That is, I mean, from the time you started until you finished them would be longer, of course. But we'd put 2 of them a month, I think, into production, and which wasn't terribly unusual because our normal schedule for a 6-minute cartoon was one every 10 weeks. There are 3 units doing 10 pictures a year, so there are 30 pictures coming out. At Disney's probably would have driven them crazy. At us, it was normal procedure.
While I was still at Leon Schlesinger's, we found out we were going to do some training films called Snafus. And for that, all of us had to be fingerprinted and classified. They would go to our neighbors and ask questions about us to see if we were loyal Americans. And one girl did not pass. Her husband, they found out, was a Nazi sympathizer, and so she couldn't get clearance. But the rest of us were all cleared. We had to wear badges with our names on it. And the funny thing is, when they gave us this work to do, they would only give us 10 cells at a time so that we would know what was going on in the cartoon. But you couldn't tell when you were painting something actually what was going on until you saw it on the screen. And we never did see them, of course. They never showed them to us. And when I saw them, let's say about 10, 15 years ago, I couldn't believe that the work we had done was so mild and so, it was just nothing, really. It was, I mean, wouldn't have mattered if we had known what was going on. But that's the way things were then. When we worked on films that were all in black and white, we used gray tones. And they started with white and went all the way up to 29. And we used different shades so that it would compensate. The film, would look smooth.
9.5, Benny. 9.5, Charlie. Benny. Charlie. Charlie, Benny. Charlie, Benny. Shoes! Shoes! Shoes!
Right after the story was done, the dialogue was approved, everything was set to go, and the director would start layout. At that same time, they would be recording. And the director would direct the voice actor, Mel Blanc, Arthur Lake, who did the voice of Hook, or whatever actor. And they would coach them through the dialogue and make sure they got the performance they wanted. Mel Blanc was a genius at pulling something out of nothing, because he could basically look at one drawing or a set of drawings and he could find a performance. He was also a darn good singer. Mel started on radio.
Hello, young man. I sort of remember you from someplace. You're,
I'm a private sad sack.
Another chapter in our story, the life of Sad Sack. We pick up our story when the Sad Sack was first born. The proud father looks at the tiny bundle and says to the mother,
"You're supposed to keep the baby, not the stork."
But the Sad Sack proves to his parents that he is a brilliant child. At the end of his very first year in school, he comes running home with the happy news.
Mama, I got I got skipped to the next class. They gave me I've been expelled.
Oh yes, I knew Mel Blanc very well. He had a wonderful talent. He came to the studio the same year I did, in 1936. But he tried to get into that studio for maybe a year and a half. And whenever he would go to the fellow who was in charge, I think his name was Norman Spencer, and he did the music at that time, he hardly even looked at Mel, and he'd say, "No, we've got all the voices we need." But Mel would keep coming back because he wanted to get in there. And one day, Treg Brown was sitting at that desk. Norm wasn't feeling well. And so Mel came to him and he said, "I'd sure like to do some voices." And Treg said, "Well, let's hear what you can do." And he listens to Mel and he says, "Sit right here." And he goes and he gets Tex Avery and Chuck Jones and Frizz, and he says, "You got to hear this guy."
What's the matter, pal? You seem perturbed. Yeah, I got a morale problem. Do tell. Now take me brother Tofu. There's a guy that's got a swell spot. He's doing things. Message center, codes, secret stuff. Gee, what a lucky guy. Yeah? Well, let's have a look.
When we came across a situation in which we had to change Snafu from one thing into another, like a fairy princess would come down, you know, when you wish upon a star kind of a thing. Well, we couldn't imagine a bunch of guys in this situation we were talking about under the conditions in which they were viewing the film as having a dainty little fairy come down and hit Snafu. So I don't remember who invented the character, but we came up with a technical fairy, third class, was it? Whatever class it was, technical fairy third class. And he was a little cigar chomping guy with a bristle, and his hat was on an angle, and he had wings just like a fairy should have. And he was able to use fairy dust, but he's a tough little man and a little rascal. And so he would tap Snafu and things would happen.
How the hell do you expect a guy to study with all that racket going on?
Study? Nuts. When I get at them Nazis, I ain't gonna clunk them over the head with no books. What you gotta give them dopes is a belly full of lead. Hello, Superman.
Huh? Well, if I was Superman, I bet you I'd show him plenty.
Okay, chum. As technical fairy first class, I now pronounce you Snafuperman.
Oh, boy! Enemies of democracy, beware!
There was a model sheet for Private Snafu. All the animators had to draw the character to look the same way, but the different director units at Warner Brothers doing those Private Snafu cartoons had their own style. I mean, Chuck Jones's unit had particular animators, his point of view. They did it a certain way. The Frank Tashlin was an animator who was aspiring to work in live-action films, which he later did, and his films have a more live-action approach to the angles and the direction of the cartoon. So his cartoons are easy to spot. And even in the Private Snafu series, you can tell the Frank Tashlin cartoons from the Chuck Jones cartoons, which were more cartoony. Well, occasionally there was an appearance by Daffy Duck or Bugs Bunny in a Private Snafu cartoon. That was really an in-joke because it was the Warner studio that was doing those films, and they just thought it was a quick gag in one of the cartoons that why not have Bugs Bunny make a quick cameo. Bugs Bunny was such a star during the wartime years that his appearance was a morale booster. He represented the American everyman.
What's up, Doc?
There's no holds barred in terms of the code of ethics. You know, Snafu can drop his pants at the bat of an eyelash, so that you don't have the same restraints on Snafu that you might have on a character that's going to be in a theatrical release. And they were able to cover topics like why it's important to cover yourself with malaria netting in the middle of the jungles in Burma, because if you don't, you're going to get bit on the butt, and they'll quite literally show that, and you're going to get sick. So they were able to handle topics that were real, I wouldn't say controversial, but push the edge of acceptability and portray them against this cartoony character, and the sheer acronym snafu, you know, the situation normal all fouled up, indicates that that this guy constantly screwed up, and sort of the moral play was, you don't do what he does and you won't screw up.
I think that the cartoons exemplified the professionalism of the cartoonists who made them, and the writers who dreamed up the story essence, to be able to portray very simply the problem that they were trying to prove, or the point they were trying to make. And I think that was the best part of it. They didn't over-elaborate. They just went straight to the point, got the story told, and made Snafu or whoever look like a complete dope who came out great at the end.
Hey, you know, this is an important job I'm doing. That's my boy who said that. Ha-cha-cha-cha.
The transference from war to peace was almost perhaps more traumatic than going to war. Because when going to war is like going to prison in a way, and it's in that you're brought out of a life in which you have a measure of freedom. But when you're broken out of the war, you expect to come home and get all the apple pie, and that you won't have to make your bed all again and do all the things that you had to do during the service. In other words, you'd be free. Well, there is no such thing as freedom, really, and so it took a bit of doing. And a lot of people really suffered through that. And I think those films were designed to be helpful in finding yourself not exactly in paradise, but back in reality.
Now I'll show you the back. Next comes the girlfriend. Hello, honey. It's Hook.
Hook was more of an everyman. He was more of an every soldier, and the underlying theme of most of those cartoons is to buy some bonds now so you'll have some money after the war. Hook was what the Navy called the anchor on the ship, and the Navy produced these films.
I can't say we did our bit. I say what we did helped to win the war in the sense of information. What we tried to do was to continue to make films that would make ourselves laugh. Hopefully the audience would follow. If in so doing we found things that were ludicrous about a man like Adolf Hitler or Mussolini, we had to do it, but with a careful understanding that you cannot, that whatever else may be said about Hitler was that he was not a clown. He was a very serious, and in terms of his history, had to be considered a great villain.
The cartoons that were seen in the commercial motion picture houses were always greatly liked by everybody. And if you stop to think about them for a moment, they were very much like the old comic strip, The Katzenjammer Kids, in that they were sometimes very brutal, very sexist, very racist in many ways, but that was the way of the times.
She'll be home. Smile, please. How about Clark Kent? Did he get away?
No, he's still over there.
The real appreciation of those comic kinds of approaches were, I think, ways for the public to let off steam. They could go to the theaters, and if things were down and not too happy, or even if people had lost loved ones, they could at least go into the theaters and get some relief, and the comic part was great.
We're working with children, we're working with adults who had known Donald Duck, and the spirit of Donald and Mickey and the rest of the characters working on a war effort made that much more important. And I think that that's what created that great feeling of, well, we're doing our bit for the war effort.
everybody, not just people in the cartoon business, but everybody seemed to be of the same spirit to get this war over and win it. War is always a tragic thing, but we had no choice in the matter, and I do feel that everybody in the country, with maybe a few exceptions, were all for the war effort and did whatever they could. You are a merry melody, and I'm just a Looney Tune. Oh, won't you sing a song to me right here underneath the moon? You are as sweet as you can be, and I'm just a crazy loon. Oh, won't you take a walk with me to the strains of a wedding tune?
We're working for defense. We're working for defense. We're stepping up production by Uncle Sam's instruction. We've got a job to do, so let's all see it through. And very soon there's bound to be a V for victory. We're harvesting the corn. We're harvesting the corn. We're stepping up production by Uncle Sam's instruction. We want to do our bit to keep our country fit. We'll keep on giving more and more until we win this war.